Hi, everyone. It's Deanne Barrett here. I have the honor of being here this morning with Eira Parry from High Performance Parenting. Good morning from across the pond.
Good afternoon here.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's right. Eira, I'm so grateful to connect with you because I know that you have been in the world of sport for a long time, and now you're supporting parents as they are, encouraging their children in the world of sport, some encouraging their children to be involved in sport, and for others, helping them to enjoy the process and learn all the lessons that sport has to offer. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got started founding High Performance Parenting?
Well, I worked in sport. I worked for British Rowing for 10 years. So I was a coach and I worked in talent ID. So I worked with athletes who were very new to the sport and had been identified as having natural talent. And then my job job description was actually to find new Olympians, which sounds a lot more glamorous than it was. But basically, that was the premise of what I had to do. And I did that for 10 years and that was great. And I learned loads and it was a wonderful experience, but it was quite all encompassing. So it was a kind of 24/7 job, 7 days a week. And I wanted to take some time to spend more time with my family and have my weekends back. So I moved on from that, but I still wanted to engage with sport. I wanted to still mix with athletes. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought there wasn't really much in the way of support for parents. And I didn't feel that as a coach, I'd necessarily always done a very good job, because I was so wrapped up in my role with the athletes. And so high performance parenting was born. But the other thing which really led me down this route is that my husband's youngest son, so my stepson, is a rower, and he has gone through the ranks of junior and under 23 rowing, and he's now an Olympian, so he went to the Rio Olympics. But his journey through sport has been a real roller coaster. There have been some amazing highs, but there have also been some very, very challenging lows. So I felt like I could help parents, but I had quite a unique standpoint in that I understood the world of high performance sport and I understood what it was like to be a coach, but I also understood what it was like to be a parent sitting in the stands and feeling all that emotion. So hence here I am.
I love that. And I just can feel the passion that you have for that world. And I'm so grateful to connect with you because sport has not been a part of my life personally. It's been a part of my family's life. So back in the 1970s, my dad played professional hockey. And so my brother, typical Canadian family. And so my brother played hockey. And I know that for so many young kids, that dream of like, I could do this, I could go pro, or I could be an Olympian, that dream is in their minds, which is a wonderful thing to have. And in our household, it was even that much more real because my dad had done it.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't a very abstract thing. It was more concrete. And yet I know how parents are in this position of, I want to nurture and encourage that dream because I'm so thrilled that you have a dream and it's motivating you. But also that reality check that parents, we often feel like we have to be that voice of reality too. There are lots of things between now and when that dream could be fulfilled. There's the roller coaster of injury, and then all of the, the coaches and all the gatekeepers of, saying you can be on this team, you have to be on this team. Yeah. So I know that there's a lot in there of the mental game and how to support children when they're in this dream, but also parents having to coach them through all of the years and all of those ideas of the reality check.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you help families to really face those inevitable disappointments? You know, they tried out, they didn't make it. The coach says, do this, you know, all of those things. What's the strategy there for handling those disappointments?
Well, the first thing which I'm really clear about with parents is that for your child to be involved in sport, they basically have to put themselves in a very public forum where they might fail, and they have to, that's a very big deal. That's a very big thing to do for anybody, but for a young person in particular, it's a very big deal. And so I always say to parents, that in itself deserves a huge amount of praise. It doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter whether they win or they lose. It's the endeavor. It's the ones that try and are prepared to put themselves out there who deserve praise. You know, that's the important thing. And I talk a lot to parents about praising the processes rather than the outcomes, because it's very easy, and I still do it as a parent. It's very easy, you know, your child comes back from whatever sporting event they've been to, and the first thing you say is, oh, did you win? You know, it's very easy to do that, when actually it's the fact that they tried and they were involved and they did that publicly, which is a really commendable thing. So that's the first thing which I always stress with parents. And secondly, I say to parents that watching your child do sport, when you know that they love it and that they are ambitious and that they've worked really hard for it, watching them do that is a hugely emotive experience. Hugely. It's very, very difficult to watch them win and lose. You know, even watching them win is emotionally quite hard, you know, it's quite draining. And so preparing for that and understanding that it's going to feel like that is an important thing for parents to do, to actually think about it beforehand. And I often say to parents, find out before you go to a competition, if you possibly can, what is the likely outcome? Like, is it a kind of done deal because they're really good and it's not a really high level competition, they're going to win easily? Or actually, are they competing in something that's above their age group and they're probably going to come last, but it's fine? So having an element of thinking about it and preparing for it and managing your expectations and understanding what might happen is a really important thing for parents, because the last thing that you want to do as a parent, but probably the first thing that your emotions do to you, is to get angry and to feel it's not fair, they tried so hard, I feel like it's mean, you know, all of those things. That is your natural reaction. Like when my stepson first tried out in 2016 for the Rio Olympics, he didn't get selected. He was the last one not to go. And I was angry, I was mad, and I felt like it was unfair. But actually, you have to kind of rationalize it, you have to rein that in, you have to think about the fact that the coach and the people who are selecting the team, they're trying to do their best to pick the best team. And if your child isn't in that team, that's hugely disappointing. It's very important to empathize with them and to show them that you feel their pain and it's hard, but also to empower them by saying, on this day, you weren't good enough yet. So let's think about how we can move on from here. Why don't you get some feedback from your coach and ask the question, what more did I need to do to have been on that team? Because that gives the child the power to get to where they want to be. By giving them a message of anger and unfairness, that takes all the power away from them. That's like something's been perpetrated against them, that there's nothing they can do about it. And that's a hard place to be as a child. So I encourage parents, accept the fact that you're going to have this emotional response to it, try and prepare for it, and then take a moment, rationalize it, and look at how you can rebuild from there. Yeah.
Beautiful. What you've described also is the steps that it takes to be coachable, you know, to hear the feedback and receive okay, this is the skill set I need to keep working on, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Because that, in so many ways, the skill level and the coachability that you can take it in, even though you might think, I don't agree with that, but that's what I will do, is the next step that prepares them in so many ways for the next level that they might try and reach for.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think a lot of parents have difficulties around fairness, around thinking that the process hasn't been fair. And I do totally get that. You know, it's hard. And I suppose what you have to think is, if you asked everybody involved in this selection process, would all of them say it was unfair? And if everybody would say it was unfair, then you need to do something about that. You have a case. But if actually only the people who maybe didn't get into the team think it's unfair, but everybody else thinks it's fair, then maybe you're just going to have to take a deep breath and understand that's how it works. And it isn't always going to be the best fun. But the ultimate lessons and the ultimate achievements will be. I suppose that's the message.
Yeah. And I love the focus that you have of keeping it on, yes, as a parent, you're going to feel this way, but imagine the experience your child has just had and how to support them for the next experience they're about to have.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you about that idea of a backup plan. So, you know, especially when adolescents are teenagers, they've been in their sport for a while, they are, you know, reaching those higher and higher levels, and they're really starting to think, like, can I set my hopes on doing this, you know, whether it's being the Olympics, making the national team, doing it professionally, you know, they're gearing for that. And yet we're trying to tell them as parents and educators, you still need to keep up your education, you still need to have a plan. If that's not working, how do we achieve that balance of helping them recognize that they can go for it in their sport, but also they need to have other things in their life and a potential backup plan if that plan doesn't see fruition?
Well, however good a sports person they are, the reality is not many people can make a living out of sport beyond the age of 30. So you're talking about, if they go off to university, if they go off to college, you're talking about 9 years of their working life, essentially. And then they've got another 37 years to do something else and to pay the bills. So if you just look at the facts, you've got to have another string to your bow. And there are people, of course, there are sports people who have played sport and then, because of the level of their fame, they've managed to make a living, you know, forever from it. But they are very, very, very few and far between, and that's a reality. I think if it certainly in the UK, if you look at the statistics from, say, football academies, it's something like less than 1% of the numbers that start in the football academy will make money from playing football. Now that, you know, hard as it may be, it's important to actually flag those things up with your child and actually discuss those things, because that's the reality of it. And the other thing which I think it's really important to talk about with parents is that it's quite possible for them to do both. You know, it is perfectly possible to pursue your sporting ambition and to do school well. You have to be disciplined. You have to make sacrifices. I always say to parents, like, out of sport, school, social life, family, hobbies, and anything else, you can do 2 of those on the front foot really well, and everything else has to be on the back burner. So that means that most of the time you're going to need to do school and sport, and everything else is going to have to be a lower priority. And, you know, that's the reality of it. So if they want to be a sports person, compromise is part of the lifestyle, and that's the way it has to be. And I guess talking to parents about how they can support them in terms of having a good routine at home, making sure that the jobs get done before, like putting school first. Like school's really important. Like if you get the schoolwork done, you can do as much sport as you like, but it can't really always be the other way around. And making parents feel kind of supported and unafraid to be disciplined and to set, lead by example and say, if you want to be a good sports person, discipline is going to have to be part of your life. So you need to put your phone down and you need to do your homework. Yeah, I guess that would be the message.
Yeah, and in our house, the rule was if you don't go to school that day because you're not feeling well, no hockey that night. So some days my brother would drag himself to school because he knew he wanted to go to practice that night.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us, I know that when students are so involved in sport, as you said, they have two things. They have sport and they have school. And their sport fills up so much of their life in terms of all of the needs they have. They have that sense of competition, whether it's against other teams or their own time. They have the connection of their teammates around them. They have that sense of purpose and significance. And when it comes time for someone to decide, am I going to keep going, or is this the time for my career in this sport or my enjoyment of this sport? Is it over? How do you help people make that transition? Because I know there can be a sense of grieving and a sense of loss because the sport has filled up so much of their time but met so many of their needs in their life. And then it's a complete shift to, how do I meet those needs in other ways? Like now, where do I find friends? I used to be friends with all my sporting friends, and they're busy with their sport. And so the friendships sometimes end as a result. How do you help people when they are facing the end of their sporting career for whatever reason?
Well, it's very hard, and it's particularly hard if your sporting career has come to an end through something that's out of your control, like you've got injured and you were right up there and then suddenly it's over. In terms of the psychology of it, it's been likened to grieving for somebody dying. I mean, it is very much like that, going through that, the stages of grieving, of being kind of depressed and angry and all of that stuff. When I work with athletes, when they're still, engaged in sport, and it's a really big focus in this country at the moment. I don't know what it's like in the US, but the idea of athletes preparing for transition out of sport and making sure that all the way through their sporting life, they're engaged in something else. So whether it's part-time education or whether they are getting some kind of skill set whilst they're still training. And it is becoming more the norm, actually, that athletes are preparing for the inevitable, because it's kind of like death and paying taxes, isn't it? They're definitely not going to do sport for their whole life. In this country, athletes that are funded to be on a national team also have support from a performance lifestyle advisor. So they have somebody on hand who can help them with gaining qualifications, getting diplomas, part-time study, all of that, which is an amazing piece of support. I don't know if you have anything like that in the US. So my message, I mean, similar to the message about education, is that you just have got to prepare for it. And in a lot of ways, although being an athlete is hard, of course it's hard, it's also in a lot of ways a dream come true. Like if you're talented enough to be that good and to be able to follow your dream in that way, then make the most of it, but accept the fact that it's going to change. And I think you've got to take the good with the bad, and you've got to accept that. So my message would be that preparation is the most important thing. Don't bury your head in the sand. Don't pretend that it's not going to happen, and just prepare. Always think it could happen tomorrow. So let's prepare for the worst, because it could. I'm talking from experience. My stepson had a major accident at training in 2015, and we didn't think he'd ever walk again, let alone row again. So, you know, you are literally an injury away from your sporting career being over. So just prepare. Yeah.
And what's your take on, I know we're in the middle of the Olympics right now, what's your take on, I can see your Twitter feed where you are, you know, talking about different athletes. I loved one of the things that you said, the real test of an athlete is how they rebuild themselves after disappointment and prepare for the next event.
Yeah, that's true. That was about Elise Christie, who is one of our short track speed skaters, who had a terrible, terrible time in the Sochi Olympics because she was expected to get a medal, and she crashed out of all 3 of her finals and didn't finish. And she also experienced some really difficult comments from people on social media, and she went away and took 4 years to kind of come back stronger. She had her final in her first event 2 days ago. She fell, so she didn't finish. And, you know, it's heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking to watch something like that when it's been so public. And she's had so much flack for it. But I really genuinely believe that she'll be in her hotel with the sports psychologist now, working out how she makes the most of the next 2 events. And that is genuinely what makes an amazing athlete. And the athletes that I've worked with in British rowing, like, the public often only see athletes at the pinnacle of their career. They see them when they're standing on the podium and giving the interviews, but you don't always see the rock bottom moments. And almost every athlete who's achieved has had a rock bottom moment. I always used to say when I was a coach, your biggest win will come from your worst loss, because your worst loss will teach you how to get to your biggest win. And that's the truth. But the reality is, for some people, that loss and that feeling of it being awful is enough to make them say, I don't want to do it anymore. And you know, I suppose I would encourage people to try to learn from that kind of horror and think, it's awful, I don't ever want to be in this position again, but I'm going to make myself a plan to get out and to get back up on top. And I think that's what great athletes do.
And that really is resilience, isn't it? Realizing now it's recalculating and what's the plan, and that there's always a next step.
Yeah. It's never game over. Or if it is game over, you know, if you genuinely don't want to do it anymore, that's fine as well. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything, but it's that kind of process of thinking about it, taking it on board, accepting what's happened, and moving on in whatever way, you know, that you choose to move on. Yeah.
I know a lot of people get stuck in, I don't know how to make the best decision in this moment. And I often invite them to just drop that word best. Like, just think, there's a series of decisions you can make in one direction, or a series of decisions you can make in another direction. And at a certain point, it becomes very unknown. So which set of decisions are you prepared to make right now?
Yeah.
And then we don't get stuck, because I know I've been there, getting stuck in like, which decision do I make? It's like, it's choose one path and know that there always might be a way to get to the other one.
Yeah, exactly right. You can always turn around and go back and
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very rarely that we reach a point where the door is closed permanently behind us, that we can't go back.
Yeah.
Well, Eira, I just want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise and your heart, because I think what you've highlighted so beautifully is the emotional world of sport. We all know that, you know, sport is good for our physical bodies and, you know, gives us a life of health and vitality, but also it takes care of our emotions to be able to really be in it and win it and understand lifelong the impact that this has on us and our mindset and our ability to be resilient and pick ourselves up from the most difficult places. And so thank you to all of the parents who are going to watch this with us. And I hope there's a nugget of insight that you can take away with you to give you more courage and support, and know that you're not alone in all of the emotions that sport brings up in all of us. So Eira, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, everyone, until next time, bye-bye.